This video is made possible by the Eliason Group, an Agile consulting service. You can locate the video under Follow Us, then select Recent Videos on YouTube on the agilenewengland.org website.
All right, good. So, some of you are newer to Agile. How many of you have been practicing an Agile approach for, say, 5 years or more? Oh, a lot of you. Okay. 3 years? And then the last year or so? Okay. And some of you are new. So, we started to use Agile approaches because we couldn't release fast enough. Right? The releases were long. We couldn't change what we wanted to do fast enough. We would get partway through a project and all of a sudden somebody wanted some kind of a change. We discovered many, many defects much, much later. Escape defect rates, you might remember that as a metric. And we want to be able to move from a project-based approach to a product-oriented approach. So the PMI, and there's a lot of things that the PMI does that's very good. But one of the things the PMI promoted was this idea of resource efficiency. That when you have people who are done with a project, they go back into a pool of people. And this pool of people then become available for yet another project. And that meant, that totally discounted the fact that knowledge workers need to learn how to work together. In fact, we spend most of our time reading code, reading tests, and figuring out how the heck to work with a guy or a girl next to us. Right? This is what we spend time on. So when we think about resource efficiency, it might have seemed like a good idea. It's often a good idea for some kind of waterfallish projects, such as construction. That even there's iteration and incrementalism. But it's not a really good idea for knowledge work. So let me tell you about the two kinds of Agile approaches. How many people here are using Scrum? Maybe a better question is, who here is not using Scrum? Okay, 5 of us. So the reason I asked that question is because Scrum is based on an iteration approach to Agile. You have time boxes. All of these time boxes are supposed to be the same length. Inside the time box, you do requirements, analysis, design, code, integrate, and test, in whatever form you like. How many of you ever want to change what's in your time box in the middle of the sprint? Am I the only idiot? No, I'm not the only idiot. So my experience is that most organizations who need to use an Agile approach actually find a very difficult time with strict time boxes. Now you have another approach, but you might not get a certification in it. And then HR won't know how to hire you, right? This is actually a very big problem. The other approach is called flow, where you might have different sizes of features, and for each feature, you clarify the feature, you do, which is the requirements, you do analysis, design, code, integration, and test. But you might not do any backlog refinement and backlog planning as a team. You might decide you need to do some of that at some point. So you might have a cadence, but you don't necessarily do those kinds of team-based activities. And so all this nonsense with story points and estimation, you don't do it in flow, or at least you don't need to. So how many of you might like to see it flow might work for you. Yeah, so I actually use flow in my work. I have a cadence of planning because I really need to plan what I'm doing. So I plan for a year, I replan for quarters, I do rolling wave planning inside the quarters. Does this sound familiar to you? I run a business, right? But every single week, I plan what I will do for the next week. I happen to plan on a Sunday because I will just admit, I am slightly, more than slightly geeky. So I plan on Sunday for the work I will do up until Friday afternoon. And that way I know what I'm doing. And if I need to change what I'm doing in the week, I can readjust as I proceed. So there are several commonalities between these two kinds of agile approaches. One is that they both limit the work in progress width, right? Work in progress. So the time boxes say we will limit scope, and that's how we will limit our width. Flow specifically limits the team's width across, hopefully, the columns and the board, and certainly for the number of items in the ready column. I believe I have a couple of images to show you later for what a Kanban board might look like if you're not aware of it. Both approaches are based on collaboration. If you don't have a collaborative team, then you're not really doing an agile approach. And they're both focused on throughput. How can we finish work before we take more work, right? The throughput is really key. Both of them result in running tested features. So I hope I haven't said anything new to you, except you might not be that aware of flow-based approaches. So my guidelines for when to use each are iterations work when you can predict what the team will do in the next couple of weeks. You don't have production support, you don't have customer support, your product owner understands, has a bunch of certainty about the work, or you can plan for the number of experiments and then go on. But flow is really good for when the team has interruptions. If you have production support or customer support or any kind of interrupt-based work, you might not be able to use an iteration-based approach. Now, I said before that I really like to work in flow, but with a cadence of planning. So I really like the idea of iterations, and I time box everything. I've been time boxing all of my work, I believe since so I started to work in May of 1977, and in July of 1977, I got to the 90% schedule game. So I was very lucky that I encountered it very early in my career, and that's when my boss said to me, would you like some help? Because I had said it's a 4-week task, I got to 90% at 4 weeks, I got to 92% at 5 weeks, I got to 92.5% at 6 weeks, like that. So he said, would you like some help with this? And I said, oh yes, I really have no idea what I'm doing. He said, give yourself 1 to 2 day tasks. And those are inch pebbles, not milestones, which means you can predict the next day or so at a time. Does this sound familiar, like small stories to you? Yeah, they were tasks for me. So I managed to, because I was time boxing the work to a day or so, I actually understood how to get out of the mess I was in. So I've talked about flow and I've talked about cadence. And let me tell you what I think the real problem with Agile is and why I call this for your Agile team. We have, George Bach said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the model of time boxes for managing the work, very useful. The model of flow through a team, very useful. Possibly some of the ceremonies are useful. I use retrospectives. I use planning of and many varieties. But the problem we have is that we are in framework hell. Everyone's got their own damn framework. Everyone's framework is right. We have, mine's better than yours, and when I said, when I talked about the certification problem, it's really a problem. So does anybody here really believe that you can master a new technique or a new approach to anything in software development in 2 days? We all know you cannot do this. You are not a master, you're an initiator, or an initiate? Is that, yeah, that's what they call it. You're an initiate. So, you're not an idiot. So, I think it's really important to say, we have a ton of peer pressure about my Agile approach is better than your Agile approach. And Scrum is best. No, Kanban is best. And the personalities in our field don't help. So, some of you have heard me talk about Ken and Jeff and David. That's David J. Anderson, the originator of capital T, the Kanban method, capital K and capital M. So, I mean, it's Kanban. It's a board with columns. And Scrum is a time box with a bunch of roles and ceremonies. So, and we have cornered the market on coaches. Right? And the coaches are all trying to help the teams. And this is a really good thing because the teams need a lot of help. The teams have trouble understanding the ceremonies. They have trouble understanding what the requirements are. They have technical debt from a gazillion years ago because nobody gets to work on greenfield code, greenfield project. It's all, how do we use Agile for this stuff? And every time I come into an organization, the teams tell me they feel as if they are handcuffed. They are handcuffed to the code, they're handcuffed to their tests, they're handcuffed to how they are supposed to work. And the problem is, the culture, the Agile culture, can change those handcuffs. But the frameworks don't change the culture. Right? The frameworks mean that too often managers still say, you know, Johanna, I know that you're working with this team, but please can't you do this other thing? And no, it does not go on the board at all. So that doesn't work. Managers still want to know who's the best developer, who's the best tester, who's the best product owner. But we work by teams. How could we be doing best in anything in particular? So when Cheyenne and I work together, we are one kind of a team. When David and I work together, we're a different kind of a team. We're not better or worse. I've been fortunate to work with both of them. I haven't worked with you yet, Damon. So, but I'm sure we would be yet a different kind of a team. So I think it's really important to say, we create our teams and each team is different. And the question is, how do we get the throughput? Too often, teams and managers want 100% utilization. So all of you understand what 128 is like at 100% utilization. It's a parking lot. But you might have a podcast on your phone, or you're listening to BZ, wondering when this traffic will go. Right? You know that. So we don't really want 100% utilization. So why are we measuring it? And then the reward system reinforces this individualness, not the ability to recognize teams for their work. So this is the problem. Let me talk about culture. And if you have not yet read Edgar Schein's Organizational Culture and Leadership, I have I think the second or third edition, not the fifth edition, but I decided to show you the cover from the most recent book. Think about these three questions. I'm not going to ask you to answer them. What can we discuss? How do we treat each other? And what do we reward? So if managers say, we want an agile approach, but they reward individuals and they treat each other, we treat each other so that we have some people up in the hierarchy and some people lower, we are not going to have a collaborative team. Right? So I could give you more examples, but I promise not to whine too much. So let me talk about an agile picture that makes sense to me. This is my general agile picture. And you notice ideas come into this funnel. A responsible person, often called a product owner, takes those ideas and creates a ranked backlog. A cross-functional team works together to create shippable products on a regular basis. Now, I didn't say how long this regular basis is. If you ask me, the teams create shippable product at least once a day. That's my guideline. If you can't quite get there, my question to you is what would it take for you to be able to release shippable product on a regular basis? Now, some of you would say, we cannot ship to our customers, we have to ship only internally. I would say fine. I did some work with a company that makes software for a school-based system. So for example, they can change almost everything except for the grading component in the middle of a semester. I mean, you wouldn't want people to change your grades in the middle of the semester. Well, okay, I might have. I was an undistinguished student. So I might have liked that a lot, but most people don't like that. So, and then you figure out how to do a demo and a retrospective on a regular basis, right? So you go and get back more. So think about this kind of a picture. You don't even have to like this particular picture. You can like any other picture you want. But agile approaches get you to the place where you can say, we can release what we want, when we want, and then go back for more and reflect at some point. That's the whole point of it. So when I think about an agile culture, when I think about what can we discuss, maybe almost everything, because we collaborate on everything. And when I talk about collaboration, I actually mean literally working together. So how many of you pair on a regular basis? People. Oh, good. Some of you. Anybody mob on a regular basis? A couple of you. So if you are not mobbing, so first of all, you can mob in any kind of a life cycle. Mobbing means you take one piece of work and the entire team works on that piece of work until it's done. There's one computer with one keyboard, often a projector, and then people rotate through the mobbing. If you have not been to the Agile Games conference, yeah, talk to Nancy about that. Mobbing is really, and are you going to do a mobbing thing again?
One announcement.
Okay, good. So mobbing is a wonderful idea. I've been mobbing, so there's a difference between swarming. Swarming is when the entire team works together, but everyone goes off and does their piece. So if you have a front-end developer, a middleware, and a back-end developer, a couple of testers, they meet together, they say, here's how we're gonna approach it, they go off and do their thing, they come back together in about an hour, they go off and reconnect, they redo their thing, right, come back and go away. So they do that over the course of the day. Pairing is two people, one computer. Mobbing is the entire team, one computer. So I have found that the benefits of mobbing outweigh almost anything else I do for throughput. Right, so if I'm mobbing on natural language work, imagine how easy it is for computer language-based work. So how do we treat each other? in the Agile culture with respect and courtesy, right? Psychological safety is actually a very big deal for Agile teams. I think for any team that really wants to work together. And if we reward team effort, not individual effort, then we have a shot at actually reinforcing the kind of work we want to do. So I am not going to ask you what your culture does or does not do. You can think about that and decide if you want to write anything down at some point in the future. So when we think about resource efficiency, it's about each individual's contribution. This comes from cost accounting, which makes kind of sense if you're building hard stuff. Sort of. It still might not make all kinds of sense for everything. And the idea is that you create experts. Experts do their thing, so the work comes in, the first expert takes it, that person hands off to the next expert, that person hands off to the next expert, etc., until it's done. And resource efficiency does work for certain things. So for example, in our house, there's really not very much room for a person with vertigo and a person without vertigo to make dinner. We use resource efficiency, and we utilize my husband 100%. I am color. My job is to create humor in the situation, to comment on the news. It is not my job to do anything else, because I get in the way of his resource efficiency. Every so often I can set the table, but that's really it. So sometimes we want resource efficiency, right? But often not that much at work. So flow efficiency really talks about the team's throughputs. And I bet you've heard the phrase outcomes, not outputs. So if you think about resource efficiency, right, if you have an architect saying, oh God, I'm going to offend people, well, fine, I'll offend people. Architects think big architectural thoughts, and they hand off the architecture to the developers. And they think big design thoughts, and they hand off the specs and everything else to the testers. And the testers actually think big testing thoughts, because it's really hard. It's actually more difficult to test something than it is to create it. So all these people are handing off to each other, right? And at some point the rubber meets the road. But when we think about flow efficiency, the entire team optimizes up for the team. So you might pair, you might swarm, you might mob. You might say, maybe this developer and this tester works together on this piece, maybe that developer works with a different developer there, right? I'm not saying that you have to have one right way of working together as a collaborative team, but that if you focus on optimizing up for the team, some people might actually end up with nothing to do. What happens when you have nothing to do? Panic? So, I have found that when I have nothing to do, I think really interesting ideas. I discover, okay, so Richard is in the back. So Richard came over to my house and we recorded a podcast, and I had to apologize for the state of my office. Even though when I think of really good things to do, I don't think about cleaning my office. It's not up there. But I've been thinking about really interesting things I could be writing about. I've been thinking about things, workshops I want to create, right? So when you are part of a team and you have some slack time, you might think, I could refactor that, or I could move to automating that, or I could fix that thing. I have choices aside from helping the other people on my team. So I'm part of me wants to ask this question and see hands, but I don't want to offend you. So think back to the last time you looked at the build system. If your build system doesn't build in 20 minutes, 10 minutes, something reasonably fast, even faster, if your automated tests, your automated smoke tests take longer than a few minutes, if you had slack time, what would you be able to do about that? Would you be able to spend a few minutes brainstorming something? Would you be able to spend a little time with your colleagues and say, we could attack this thing that's making us crazy in our team? And that's all because we're focused on flow efficiency. We're not optimizing for each person, we're optimizing for the team's throughput. Right, so that's a really big thing. So when I say for your Agile team, I want you to think about how you can work as a team, how can you can visualize work in the bottlenecks, how to measure throughput, and how to retrospect and improve. This is not an Agile framework, except it is an Agile framework. It's a framework for using an Agile approach to make your work life better and to break off the shackles of your framework hell. Okay. So when I think of an Agile team, I think of enough people to cover the work in terms of they have enough skills and capabilities as a team. So does that mean that sometimes a tester might be a developer? Maybe, but I have found that when I'm a tester, I'm not very good at developing. I mean, I'm good at developing tests, but my mindset is testing. When I'm a developer, I am extremely good at ignoring all of the defects in my code. Extremely good, right? And I've been this way forever. So this is why, as a writer, I hire editors, because they find stuff for me. A team has a specific and clear goal. They understand what they have to do. They collaborate on interdependent work. Nobody can do all the work by themselves. They're small enough that they can work together. I happen to like 4 to 6 person teams. You might like slightly bigger. For me, 9 people is the absolute edge. Turns out that at the last Agile conference in Agile 2018, Larry Maccheroni had data that says teams of 15 are okay. I need to talk to Larry because my experience is that teams of 15 are often teams of 12 and teams of 3. And the 3 are isolated by the 12 and they become a clique over there and they get shut out. So I need to talk to Larry. Maybe you have worked with nicer people than I have. Anything is possible. But however you work together, think about how can we make this team small enough that we can work together and the team owns all of its own work. So the team is capable of understanding the requirements and maybe even talking to the customer. Yeah, I know, what a novel idea. And the team is capable of shipping. Now, there are some places where shipping needs a regulatory thing. Brian and Nancy probably can talk much more about that than I can. So, but if you have, I hate to say this, if you have a DevOps team, that's the wrong approach to DevOps. DevOps is integrated into your team so that the team can release. If you have to go through a change review board, that means you cannot release by yourselves. So moving to an Agile approach is really, really hard. So the first question is, how can you know that you have a team? And for me, this is about a clear charter. What does the team have to do, at least for now? How do they know when they're done? And can they create psychological safety in the team? So Amy Edmondson has a wonderful TED Talk and a couple of books. I just bought her her most recent book, so I have not even cracked it open. Right, but even if you just look at the TED Talk, it's a really good TED Talk. Oh, here it is. So the nice thing about psychological safety is we expect to learn from small experiments. I don't know how many of you are supposed to understand we can commit to this amount of work inside an iteration, and we will know exactly how long it will take, and we can totally understand everything about this piece of work. That is not my experience. My experience is that work is often messy and has a lot of unknowns. So if we can use small experiments to learn as we actually do the work, we are much better off. Teams who can use clear and direct language often create psychological safety. Now, some of the language might not fit for you. I once worked in a place where people said, "That's brain dead." We were not nearly as politically correct then as we are now. So that was fine for us at the time. Would I change that language now? Probably, and maybe not. Because I'm kind of oblivious to that kind of thing. You might not be. So the team decides what kind of language is acceptable. Teams who have psychological safety can admit when they don't know something, when they don't know as an individual, when they don't know as a team. If you cannot say to your team members, "I don't know," you might not be safe enough on your team to really be able to use the team to the best of your ability. Now, this is Edmondson's wording, acknowledge when we fail. I am totally allergic to this fail fast crap. It's not fail fast, it's learning early. However, this is what Amy Edmondson says. So I actually say, the faster I realize I don't know something, the faster I can ask for help. So for me, it's not so much acknowledging when we fail, it's acknowledging that our knowledge falls off a cliff, right? And when we fall off the cliff, fine, we need to ask for some kind of assistance. And psychologically safe teams can set boundaries on personal and team decisions. What kind of decisions can people make? What kind of decisions can teams make? So an individual person might use a Kanban board in their office if they want to show their flow, but the team is using a different kind of a board, and that has to be okay, right? Because they're not interfering with the team's work, but they are seeing their work separately. So let me talk about visualizing work and bottlenecks. This is actually a graph of organizational cycle time and lead time from a real client. So T0, the company selects work. T1, it goes on the backlog. T2, the team starts. This is when they take it off the ready column. So this particular team says when the team has everybody except for the UI people. The UI people are in T3. So, and the problem is they believe in resource efficiency for the UI people, this particular organization. So Cliff, when he started to graph this, said, so do you get the same UI person every time? No, we get a different UI person every time. So they have cycles of UI, and it goes into the UI team's queue, the UI team works on it, sends it back. If the team doesn't like it, if the product owner doesn't like it, it goes back into the UI team's queue for the next available UI person. So they are not even guaranteed to get the same UI person again. And they cycle through this several times. At some point, they have user acceptance, and everyone agrees it's done, and then they have to somehow deploy it. The deployment people have different criteria for what done means than the team does, and the deployment people change their criteria over time. So when the product owner said, yes, it's done, the deployment people actually said, no, it's not done. You need to write this stuff. You need to do that stuff. This team, for a 2-day change, often had a cycle time of 2 weeks, right? So 10 days, they spent 2 days on the development and testing. They spent a total of 10 days on all of the other stuff. And for deployment, it was another often week or two. So 2 days worth of work, 4 weeks to actually get it out. That's lead time. This is, if you are nodding and saying, oh my goodness, this looks like us, think about creating a graph like that. Yes?
Just for comparison, what was an example of the time from T0 to T5?
So, senior management would get a great idea, and you didn't ask a really interesting question about T0 to T1. You know, that often took them 6 months to 18 months. So that's why I wrote the project portfolio.
You can leave it there.
Okay. But the other 6 months of this was often finishing their great idea because the deployment was forever. Yes, but the T0 to T1, that management decision time, they were in decision time. Yeah, it was hard. So one of the things I recommend for something like this is really a Kanban board. And if you think about how to show your work, what this particular Kanban board actually reflects the previous cycle and lead time. So if you are wondering, where does the time go in our Agile team, create a paper Kanban board. You don't have to use a tool. In fact, don't use a tool. Okay, I'm gonna go, I have to rant a little bit about the tyranny of Jira. Jira is, thank you. Jira is a godforsaken application. And I know those guys. I met the guy who was in charge of Atlassian back in 2004 or 5 or something. I was in Australia. He's a nice guy. This tool has taken on a life of its own, and it's exactly the same as a Gantt chart. Ever been in an old-fashioned project planning meeting where the project manager was madly typing in, and even on a projector, nobody could see what was on the Gantt chart. It's the same thing for Jira. Nobody can see what's in those boxes. So stop using it. Okay, fine. And if people want you to calculate the cycle and lead time, you can do that, right? You can do this with a paper board, and it's probably easier. In fact, I actually, my next slide is how to use cycle time for estimation. So I explained cycle time and lead time on the big chart. This is cycle time and lead time for a Kanban board, right? Cycle time is once it comes off the ready column. Lead time is from the time it's on the ready column until you release it. So if you want to use, I actually recommend that you use cycle time for estimation. I also say, just say no to story points. So story points are a surrogate for time. And what happens? People say, what is a day of work? It's X number of points, right? And so they're still doing that. We have to convert to days to be able to give our managers a gross estimate. So why not start with days and end with days? Why bother doing the story point business? This is from a real team. They have historical data that says for these 5 stories over a 10-day iteration, yes, they worked in iterations. Their rough cycle time was 2.4 days. Now, they could have said, our cycle time is between 2 and 3. They could have counted all the features and said, let's use 2.5, and had a gross estimate that's pretty darn close. Cycle time in counting stories is a much more effective way of estimation than velocity is. And here's why. Velocity is a measure of capacity, not productivity. So, if you read my Create Adaptable Life blog, sometimes I blather about my Fitbit and my walking. I walk 5,000 steps every day because gotta keep walking, right? And I walk with the rollator. It's lovely. The children in my neighborhood love to see me coming. Can I get a ride in the basket? No. Okay. So, but when it's hot outside and I'm kind of flagging, I don't walk as fast. I still walk the same circle in the neighborhood, but I don't walk as fast. And when I'm freezing cold, every so often I think, oh, so it's 45 degrees, I should go for a walk outside anyway. Yeah, who am I kidding? 45 is too cold for me outside. So I'm slower then, even though I'm freezing and I should walk faster. So my speed of walking depends on the surface. Am I walking on wet leaves or gravel? Am I walking in when it's warm out or cold out? Or am I walking at just the right temperature? So you have the same thing for your kinds of stuff, right? So velocity is almost never predictable, and it's not predictable from project to project. So one team might have a velocity of 37 points for a 2-week iteration with a certain code base where they understand what's going on. They go to another code base, they think it's 37 points. They're probably fooling themselves. So I don't find velocity very helpful at all, especially not when it's dev velocity and QA velocity. That's not a collaborative team. That's not Agile. That's waterfall, masquerading as Agile. Not going to be a happy ending there. So what kind of team-based measures can we have? Well, I already talked about cycle time. Let me talk about features completed. I really like measuring this kind of completed features chart. And you can see that the red line, features complete, goes up on a very nice, relatively stable slope. Notice the green line above, which is total features. So we start off with total features, and then we add a bunch. And then we'll kind of say, well, we add some more, and then we release some more, and then we descope, and then we add some more. At some point, we stop adding. But this is what projects look like to me. And then what's interesting is to show the burn down that's the exact opposite of the burn up for the features, for the total features. So why do I measure features? Because customers can use features. They cannot use tests. They can't use story points, but they can use running tested features. And it shows us where we are relative to where we want to be. I never put an ideal line on my feature burnup chart because maybe we can end the project earlier. Right? We might not have to do everything we think we have to do. Now, a lot of people really are enamored of earned value. I actually have no idea what earned value means for a software application. I don't understand that at all. However, if you want to show the relative finishing of feature sets, FS means feature set. No, none of this epic and theme nonsense. Right, so different tools say epic and theme, right, so feature sets. So the interesting thing about using feature sets is you can see the relative progress of work through the feature set. And this particular graph says we have not even touched feature set 3. So if we really need feature set 3 in this release, we might need another team. We might need, we are sequencing the work. Maybe this is exactly the right way to sequence the work, but we really have to think about it. So I really want to also think about what I want less of for metrics. I want less work in progress. So this is a cumulative flow diagram. If you've never seen cumulative flow, the red stuff is the work that's in progress, right? Well, the red and the purple, the yellow and the blue, and the green is done. This particular product owner thought, I will write a PRD, a requirements document, and therefore, I will be ahead of the team. So the PRD created a lot of WIP, a lot of work in progress. Now the team was pretty good, right? The team had some work in progress. They realized that they had some problems they had to do some experiments with. So the purple line, which is, is not always flat, it's not very large, and the yellow line is not so bad. But if you are learning as you go, you might expect to have some work in progress. Would I like all the lines to collapse? Sure. That's not often real life. And then the respecting and the retrospect and improve. So inspect and adapt, reflect and refine, I don't care what you call it, as long as you can choose one thing to experiment with every week or two. Some people say, we need 3 things from our retrospectives. No, choose one. Really do an experiment. Create a hypothesis. Figure out what you're going to measure. And then go on from there. You don't have to agree with me on my recommendation of one thing, but the retrospective is the most important meeting you have. You could stop doing stand-ups, you could stop walking the board, you could stop backlog refinement and backlog planning. In fact, you probably should. But if you stop doing retrospectives, you will never create the agile culture that you need. So, one of the things that Mark Kilby and I are working on in our Distributed Agile Teams book is how the culture changes. And this is from that book. So we change from individual work where the managers assign it, where we have resource efficiency and metrics, we have management plan details, Gantt charts, single loop planning, and only understanding product quality at the end, to collaborative work, where team members select the work. This is really easy with a paper board. You go up there, you take the piece of paper, you put your initials on it, you move it to a column. Or you actually say, who's available to work with me? Let's work together. Flow efficiency and measures, thinking about how we need to facilitate our conversations and decisions. And then empirical measures that matter. The double loop planning, where we challenge our assumptions and challenge the product, right? We are challenging everything and continual learning. I think the biggest thing is that managers change their culture. So managers start thinking about how do we move from 100% utilization to flowing work through the team. Instead of measuring effort, how do we measure outcomes? Instead of measuring and managing individuals, how do we create peer-based feedback? And instead of individual recognition, how do we move to team-based recognition? So I don't know how many people here are managers. Anyone willing to volunteer that they're a manager here? A couple people. So this is a really difficult problem for you. And my question to you is, how much management, literal management, do you need to do for the people who whom you serve. Maybe I can say it that way. And I suspect that you don't have to manage them, as in control them very much. You might have to point them in a direction. You might have to say, can you work with this team? You might have to ask, do you have enough capability to know how to do this work? Okay? You check in with them. And when you provide or offer feedback and encourage the team to offer feedback, you realize they can manage their careers, they can do their performance management all by themselves. That frees you up to actually manage the project portfolio. Remember what Damon asked me, the time from T0? A lot of management decision times are way too long to be effective in the organization. And that's often because managers are focused down instead of letting their teams optimize up. How do we help the managers optimize up even more? For me, that's really the big thing. So if you want one slide to free your Agile team, it's think about how you can work as a team. How can you visualize all the work and the bottlenecks that you have? Measure your throughput so you have some idea of how much stuff that's useful is actually flowing through your team. How do you retrospect and improve? And invite your managers to change the culture. This invitation is key, because all these frameworks talk about doing stuff to the team. And in reality, we need to help managers change their mindset. That means changing their behavior so they can change the culture. Thank you. Any questions?
So the point about focusing on flow rather than resource efficiency is it's clear to demonstrate, but the people who are making those decisions are the managers who have been rewarded throughout their career by focusing on the resource utilization. And it's reinforced by the natural inclination, assumption that everybody on the team makes, which is, in good faith, the way in which I can help the organization the most is by maximizing my individual efficiency. And if I spend any time outside of my primary skill set and not being 100% utilized, I am detracting from the capability of the team. So given that you've got the people who are doing the work and the people who are managing the work, both convinced that individual efficiency is the most important thing, the most valuable thing they can do. How do you begin to get them to see that it makes sense, but it's wrong?
So, I often start with a picture like this and say, we can create a collaborative team that has a reasonable throughput. And so, maybe I start actually earlier. I often ask the managers, what do you want from this team? And they often say, this project, and this project, and this project, and this project. And I say to them, do you care how the team accomplishes that? So we have to detach the managers and the team members, right? This is a total cultural change. How do we help people realize that it's time to detach from the process and the rewards and move to the outcomes? And that actually means that Agile approaches have to start with management and HR. If we change the HR reward system to rewarding teams, people would work as a collaborative team. And if we change management's incentives, then instead of having a hierarchy that they control, that means that everything would change. So the problem is, well, one of the problems is the manifesto says absolutely nothing about managers, and all the damn frameworks don't talk about managers except as controlling points. So I think that the first thing to do to create an agile culture is to invite the managers and say, here's how you can make a difference. If you want throughput, we can give you throughput. If you want individual measurement, we can do that too. So it's, I'm just starting to think about the Agile Management book. So, yeah, because this is a really big problem. I'm not sure, I don't know how to solve it. I only know some of the questions to ask. Okay, my microphone people, who are the next people?
Assuming that you've been successful in getting managers to manage the team and evaluate the team's performance, if team members feel that there is one team member who isn't really pulling his weight, maybe is not doing much of anything, what is your suggestion for how the team should deal with a team member who they don't think is performing adequately?
So often the teams know precisely who is performing and not performing, right? So I say let the team members offer feedback to that person, right? If the team members cannot offer feedback, as in with psychological safety, then they're not much of a team. So you might need a manager to manage the process of moving somebody out of the organization, but team members absolutely know, and they've known for years. Does not matter, if you work collaboratively, people know whether or not you're working together.
Yes, so I think the team members know. The question is, how do they do anything with that knowledge?
Okay, so there's, I don't have the table in here, but Hackman has a very nice table of, Hackman is the author of Teaming, it's the orange covered book, and he has a very nice table. Manager-led team, the team members can't do anything about that. Self-directed teams can't do anything about it. They have to be self-managing. If you have managers who manage the teams, the manager has to deal with it, and if the manager doesn't deal with it, all the good people will leave, unless they need health care or something, right? And if the manager is willing to let the team deal with it, and to provide some kind of mechanism so people can provide feedback in a reasonable way, that totally works. Brian?
Companies hire and promote individuals. I mean, and they don't hire and promote teams. So how do we get HR past the, well, we have to evaluate individuals in order to know how to pay them, promote them, hire them, or in rare cases, fire them? How do we get past the thinking about we have to focus on what the individual strengths are?
So people do have individual strengths, and career ladders with criteria for given levels have always existed, and unfortunately, HR is now using certifications instead of career ladders, right? So that's idiocy number one. And the other idiocy number two is most HR is a benefits organization. They are not actually human resources, performance management in the best sense of the word. They don't understand strategy. So you and I have been consulting for how long? I'm almost afraid to ask. I'm coming up on, I think I'm 24 years as a consultant now. My clients hire me again. That's my performance evaluation. Your clients hire you, right? So we know how to do this in the small, and the question is, I am not saying that an engineer with 25 years of experience is the same as a 5-year of experience engineer. I'm not saying that at all. But there are levels, and within levels, people can understand their criteria, and if you stop with stupid certifications and actually look at capabilities and outcomes, you can actually do a pretty good job with this. It was, okay.
So my question is, you talk about it all starts with changing management, and so I assume you're talking about executive suite and CEO, not the middle management where it starts, has to start.
No, I'm talking about middle management. Execs, okay, I'm really gonna offend people now. Execs are quite capable of setting a direction. And they do sales and they do customer, they do strategy, they do the big stuff. Middle management is where it's at. If we want to really create an agile culture, we have to work with middle managers. We have to invite the middle managers. Now the problem is, there are actually too many people managers in the organization and way not enough product owners, right? We have the wrong kinds of people on the wrong kinds of jobs. And there are a lot of people who wanted to be, who wanted a promotion, so they moved into management instead of being a fellow or a product owner. I mean, we have the wrong mix of people, too many of the wrong people in the organization. But we have to invite middle managers. We have to make it safe for them to say, well, I want the money, and then we need a career ladder that actually makes sense. Because great product managers and great product owners leverage the entire team. They do a lot of the work that we associate with management. So why not reward them for that work? I have a new post on my blog called Individual Contributor versus Team Member. And I think that too many managers don't understand. They work across the organization, or they need to, and the product team has to be a team. I mean, if we really want an agile organization, we have to change the culture of individual work to a culture of teamwork. This is not true. Okay.
So I want to address two related things, part of this if I can, and also disclaimer. I am normally a software engineering manager, but I'm currently unemployed. So one thing that I'd like to bring up is, if you try to reward, basically do a performance evaluation of the entire team, I don't think that's ever going to be prevalent in our society. And I also don't think that it would actually work. Human nature likes to be recognized, for what they did. But I think something that gets very close to that is to factoring how well somebody supported the team into their evaluation, and weigh heavily how much they supported the team as opposed to just their individual effort.
So we might actually say that the more senior somebody is, the more their compensation should be based on how they coached and mentored and offered assistance to others, not their specific individual contribution. Now, I will say that as a manager, I often did sort of team-based contribution. So I told my managers that bonuses were a stupid idea, because we had no control over what sales did. So depending on sales for our bonuses was totally stupid. But I could say we have a mix of individual and team-based compensation. And if we want collaborative teams, look, collaborative teams have been around for a very long time. I was part of a collaborative team back in 1977, and we were not agile by any way, shape, or form, but we worked by feature set. We worked showing demos every couple of weeks in a waterfall way. It was quite interesting. Let's not repeat the bad old days. And our compensation was based on how well we did for our stuff, how well we offered assistance and reviewed, this is back in design reviews and code reviews, how well we reviewed other people's stuff, because it was so important that we actually help other people in the organization. Individual contributor work is not what you do for the project, it's how you help your team, and yes, this person in the back.
So my question is, how does a flow-based system work with large product development involving 10 or 15 teams, say a hardware, software, firmware product, where one team's slow and is actually not really constitute an end-to-end customer-centric flow, or maybe an old system where 10, 15 teams are working on a mainframe system, where one team completing something can actually break something for some other teams.
So, you have a cadence of demos and retrospectives. So it's fine if people want to work in flow, it's fine if they want to work in time boxes. But they have to size things, they have to be ready to show their work. So back in the 80s, I started to manage programs, hardware, software, firmware, mechanical, and we use stage delivery, which is not literally an agile approach. It's in I time-boxed requirements, I time-boxed architecture, and then we moved into finishing feature sets. We had a cadence of demos every single month, so we could see how the project was progressing. Some people actually worked to that time box. Some people finished their work a few days in advance. So you can think of it as slow, but everybody was ready on that day, the 14th of the month, or the 13th or the 12th, whatever day it was. That's when we demoed the entire system. So if you wait to integrate until the very last second, it's not going to work. That's why continuous integration is necessary on a large program, right? And continuous delivery inside the organization is what you need. I wrote about that here. So. The larger the effort, the more every piece has to be agile. Other questions? Yes.
I have a question about like MVP and how it relates to like scope when you're making an agile schedule, I guess we could say, and like how far should that go past the MVP? Like we have a problem where they're like, this is the MVP, so we're going to do this, and we'll worry about the rest later, and then they never go back, and then we have like kind of half-finished things. So how do you kind of see that retrospective, like how does that play out, and how far past the MVP should you go where it's still responsible?
So I might suggest that you add some more minimums to your vocabulary. You're going to kill me. Minimum viable experiment. What business hypothesis can we talk about and improve? Minimum viable product. What can we release that doesn't break the customer? Minimum marketable feature. What can we sell? Minimum adoptable feature set. What do our customers really actually need to finish their work? So an MVP or an MMF is a piece of the minimum adoptable feature set. It's not all you have to do, but you know, so I like to think of an MVP as some people can use it, it doesn't break anything. And then an MMF is we can get revenue for this. So for me, it's MVE is the smallest thing. I guess it's small on the bottom, I don't know. Smallest thing, MVP is next, MMF is next, and minimum adoptable feature set is a lot more. And as long as people understand what they're getting, that's fine. But if they are confusing minimum viable product with, we don't have to do any more on this, they don't have a minimum adoptable feature set. And then you have half-baked products, which is fine for cookie dough and not so fine for products. Yeah. Okay, another person in the back, thank you.
Yes, so my question has to do with teams that have managers working on the teams. I've been in a lot of development organizations where that happens. Either there are team leads that have people on the team reporting directly to them, or in cases, a manager with about 6 or 7 reports. And so I just wonder, how do you, one, can you make it work? How do you make it work when you have this inequity on team members?
So Bob Sutton, in Weird Ideas That Work, actually talks about this particular case. And he says, having a manager on the team prevents other people from showing their ideas, discussing ideas equitably, and learning. So, what I do with my clients is I ask them what they want. I said, do you want to help your people learn? Oh, yes, they say. I said, do you want to see various ideas and really be able to have give and take? They say, absolutely. And then I say, fine, take the managers off the team. And I showed them Bob Sutton's book. And they sometimes, Bob Sutton is a Stanford professor. He's a really smart guy. They don't often believe him either. And then, so one thing I say is, consider an experiment, 2 weeks to a month. What kinds of things would this manager have to participate on for the next 2 weeks to a month? Because if you had to throw the entire month away, how bad would that be? They think about, oh, it would be horrible. So I said, well, okay, make it a 2-week experiment. How bad would that be? Well, we would miss our schedule. I said, you're missing it anyway. So why not just do an experiment and see what happens? One of the problems with experts is that experts create bottlenecks and queues. So if the manager, for way too long we have promoted the best technical person to being a manager because we didn't have career ladders, so we didn't know how to get people the money that they deserve. So this is all part of the culture. So how do we break this? Through careful experimentation and invitation. I don't have, I wish I had a recipe and I could say, do this, say that, it'll work. Works for me about half the time. I really like experiments though. Experiments work. David?
Just following up, I've got a different experiment that I'm participating in as part of that, where our managers are half-time people managers and half-time they're player coaches on a squad. But the squad that they're on, they're the only person from their team. So none of their direct reports are in there. So they might be the product owner managing other product owners, but there are no other product owners on their team. Or they might be a developer, and there might be other developers on the team, but they don't report to them.
Right, and that makes it much more equitable. Yeah, I've seen that work very well. So there's a person over here. Oh, okay.
So HR systems, reward systems are notoriously slow to change. So with the days, weeks, months, years, decades, possibly centuries, that it takes for HR to move to more of a team-based reward system, what do you suggest are some of the steps that an individual team or teams can take to help move their team more towards a team-based reward focus or team-based focus?
So I would request, excuse me, this is where managers can really help. So if the manager can eliminate the curve-based approach to performance management, right? We're supposed to grade people on a curve, which is stupid. I can talk about that later. And create criteria by which people understand what level makes sense for them. And then almost every manager gets a pool of money. And you can, the problem is people are not getting very large raises these days because the cost of living is not going up. So take that pool of money, decide 80% is individuals, and you'll allocate it however you allocate it for individuals. And 20% is for the team. So instead, and I've done this when I only had 10 grand for a team, and I actually said to the team, how do you want to divvy it up? And this particular team had one person who was actually the technical writer, who was the soul of the team, and they said, give her 50%, we'll split the rest. And she didn't like that, so we ended up doing it anyway, and we all went out for dinner. Well, she took us out for dinner, which was very nice. And what was really interesting was that people on the team understood who had done the soul, kind of, I don't want to call it the soul-sucking work, but the hard work of really understanding what was going on. So I guess the first thing is, can you get the raises for the team up at a level so you're optimizing for the team at that level? Start there, see if you can make some team-based compensation there. Yes?
You mentioned about paper board, instead of using Jira or something like that. How practical it is with this global team, the remote team all over the world?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So let me get back to my, I should be able to do this, but I don't know how. So if you look at from chaos to successful distributed agile teams, we actually recommend that people start with a board, a cork board with paper, sticky, something. You can take a picture of it. My question to you is, how often does stickies or anything move across the columns? Our marks in my experience is that nothing moves much faster than once a day. And if only one thing moves once a day, you can take a picture of it, put it in a wiki, God forbid SharePoint, right? Put it somewhere the entire team has access to it and they can see what's going on. If you get really good at making smaller stuff and your throughput increases so that everything is going faster, then consider moving to a tool. But by then you understand your flow. So too often distributed teams use a Scrum board, which doesn't tell them where stuff is. In a distributed team, you actually need to know more about where stuff is, right, than less. Because you can't all just talk to each other. Did that make sense? Okay. Yes?
Thank you, Joanna, for speaking tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. One of the things about principles of Agile is, like you said, Jira is just a tool. You can use almost anything to move your storage around.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've seen last month, I'm looking for a more Scrum Master job. It's a more pure Scrum Master job. I've seen a lot of companies that say to me, well, do you develop code? And a lot of companies, I would say about 60% are saying, I want you to be a coder and a Scrum Master. I want you to be a tester and a Scrum Master. What do you say to those companies? Like, they
So
don't
they
think
don't really want a
a
Scrum Master.
100%, so it's a job.
Right, so they do not want somebody who removes impediments for a team.
Yes.
They don't want somebody who facilitates the team's process. They don't want somebody to actually work across the organization to make life easier for the team. They want to do Agile in name, they want cargo code Agile. So if you need a job and they will pay you money and you can stand it, take the job. Right, I mean, how can I say this? Okay, at the risk of going political, so Colin Kaepernick might be an amazing quarterback and he's unemployed because he's standing on his principles. I don't make enough money to stand on my principles. And neither does my husband. So what do? We try to make incremental improvements. Now I have fired clients, right? Because at some point I say, I don't have to do this 43 times, maybe not even 3 times. But I think it's really important to say, when is the right time to fight this fight? And when is the wrong time to fight this fight? So maybe you take a job there and say, I can help you by being more of a scrum master than a coder. Are you willing to do an experiment? Right? Maybe you negotiate that. But I think it's really important to say, you know, I stayed in jobs because I was the one with the healthcare. So I stayed in a job for 2 years that was horrible, but we had healthcare. So, I mean, you do what you need to do for your family. Okay.
Last two questions.
Let's go back a couple of questions where it was being asked about different parts being developed in different places and one team's work was breaking another team's stuff. I was asked a very similar question at a conference where I spoke back in May about you can have all the great work going on your medical device, but then it ends up breaking the electronic records system, which it's supposed to communicate with. My response to that was, the problem you're having is not being able to identify what your product truly is. If your product is defined purely as your medical device, which also happens to communicate with this thing, you're not looking in the right place. You're not defining your product widely enough.
And that's one of the reasons to have a demo on a regular basis with programs. I really like demos at least once a month, if not more often, to see how the entire thing works together. Because if you don't see your entire product, you're in big trouble. Yeah, people have drawn that circle too small. I agree with you, Brian.
Final question, Mark.
Hi. Johanna, is there a corollary there to how you measure output and the importance of measuring how slow you really are so that you have incentive and a framework in which to improve?
So do you mean measuring throughput to understand where you are?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, I mean, you can see I read a lot, right? You can, I don't know how many of you read my blogs. Thank you if you do. But I blog pretty regularly, and I started to measure my word count this year. And in January, I only wrote 10,000 words. Well, if I want to finish those 3 books that I want to finish this year, I better get cracking, right? So I started to measure things that made sense for me. And pure words is not finished words, right? That's kind of like measuring stories as opposed to measuring the entire product. But it's the first step to finishing all that stuff. So I learned a lot by myself about measuring my throughput, and I highly recommend it. Because what's that thing, what you measure, you pay attention to? There's a quote, right? What gets measured gets managed. I think that's not the actual quote. But better that you measure throughput so you can see what you really have as an effect on your customers than any other surrogate measurement.
I know all of us would like to have Johanna answer the question, maybe through the, evening too late, but we have a program to adhere to, so shall we give a large Agile member hand?
Thank you all very much, and if you have more questions, email me.